Lorient, France, March 15, 1943. The salty Atlantic air penetrated through the cracks of the fortified bunker where Admiral Karl Dönitz, supreme commander of German submarine warfare, bent over maps marked with red crosses. Each cross represented an Allied ship at the bottom of the ocean. And there were many crosses. 63 ships sunk in February alone. 359,000 tons of cargo capacity sent to the icy depths of the Atlantic. The numbers danced before Dönitz's eyes like a symphony of victory. His gray wolves, the dreaded U-boats, were strangling Great Britain. The math was simple, elegant, inevitable. British shipyards, bombed and exhausted, took 8 to 10 months to build a single freighter. His submarines sank 3 per week. Dönitz allowed himself a rare smile as he scribbled calculations in the margin of a report. The tonnage war was working. The strategy he had defended against skeptics in the high command was proving correct. Every Allied ship at the bottom of the sea was a nail in Britain's coffin. No supplies, no war. No ships, no supplies. The logical chain was unbreakable. An officer entered with the latest intelligence report on American construction capacity. Dönitz barely leafed through it. The Americans? Yes, they had resources. Yes, they had ambition. But shipbuilding was an ancient art, a skill developed over centuries. Skilled riveters didn't grow on trees. Shipyards didn't spring from nowhere. America was a nation of farmers and assembly line workers, not shipbuilders. Dönitz pushed the report aside and returned to his maps. The Americans can build ships, he told the officer, his voice laden with Prussian certainty. But they cannot build them faster than we sink them. The math is on our side. It's only a matter of time. What Karl Dönitz did not know that March 1943, as his fingers traced convoy routes on the Atlantic map, was that the equation had already completely changed. The war he thought he was winning was already lost. Not at sea, where his U-boats still hunted with lethal efficiency, but on the muddy banks of Oregon's Willamette River, on the noisy docks of Richmond, California, in improvised shipyards of dozens of American cities that had never built a ship before. Germany was fighting ships. The United States was manufacturing them like automobiles. The Liberty ship was not just a freighter, it was the physical embodiment of a philosophy the Axis never understood. In total industrial war, perfection is the enemy of sufficient, and sufficient in massive quantity is invincible. Germany had bet its survival on the premise that engineering excellence would overcome brute volume. That bet was about to cost them everything. The disparity wasn't just large, it was obscene. It was the difference between civilizations operating in completely different industrial paradigms. A traditional British shipyard, using methods dating back to the Victorian era, took 250 to 300 days to build a single 10,000-ton freighter. Each ship was a work of art, with thousands of rivets hand-hammered by skilled craftsmen, each curve of the hull shaped with almost artisanal precision. The Americans approached the problem differently. Henry Kaiser, a dam construction entrepreneur without a single day of experience in shipbuilding, looked at the challenge and saw not a ship, but a product. And products could be manufactured. At his Richmond shipyards in California, the average construction time for a Liberty ship was 42 days, not months, days. The record set in November 1942 with the SS Robert E. Peary was 4 days and 15.5 hours from keel to launch. A fully functional 10,000-ton ship, built faster than a traditional riveter could finish a single hull section. The numbers transformed into an almost incomprehensible reality. During all of World War II, the United States built 2,710 Liberty ships. That represented 29 million tons of cargo capacity, a fleet larger than the entire German, Japanese, and Italian merchant navies combined at the start of the war. And that was just the Liberties, not counting the Victory ships, the tankers, the destroyers, the escort carriers, the LSTs, and dozens of other designs pouring from American production lines in an endless deluge of welded steel. The mathematics of German defeat was already being written in shipyard ledgers. Germany sank approximately 2,828 Allied ships in the Atlantic during the entire war. The United States alone produced almost that number just in Liberty ships. For every ship a U-boat sank, 3 new ones were already sliding down the launching ramps. Dönitz's tonnage war was being won, but not by him. The cost told an equally brutal story. Each Liberty ship cost $2 million and required 200,000 man-hours of labor. A single U-boat cost the equivalent of 2.5 Liberty ships and took 12 to 18 months to build. When a Liberty sank, it was replaced in weeks. When a U-boat sank, it took with it months of specialized work, years of crew training and resources Germany simply didn't have. The exchange wasn't just unfavorable, it was catastrophic. In 1943, the silent turning point of the Battle of the Atlantic, the United States produced ships 3 times faster than the Axis could sink them. Not twice, 3. With every torpedo fired, every ship sent to the bottom, the Allied fleet grew. The industrial logic was as inescapable and relentless as the tide. It didn't matter how many ships Dönitz sank. There would always be more. The revolution began not in a naval design office, but in the mind of a man who had never built a ship. Henry Kaiser was a dam builder, a man who had tamed rivers and carved mountains. But in 1940, when the American government sought someone to mass-produce ships, he had no more maritime experience than a Kansas farmer. What he had was something more valuable: a deep understanding of mass production and a radical willingness to discard 300 years of naval tradition. Kaiser looked at shipbuilding and saw Henry Ford. He saw assembly lines. He saw standardization. He saw welding instead of riveting, prefabrication instead of in-situ construction, and unskilled workers trained in weeks instead of craftsmen formed over years. The traditional naval community considered him a charlatan. The British, proud of their Clyde and Belfast shipbuilders, openly laughed at his methods. They stopped laughing when the first Liberty ship came out of Richmond shipyards in just 45 days. The genius was in the modular design. A Liberty ship wasn't built, it was assembled. Each ship was divided into 250 prefabricated sections, each built on land by specialized teams. One team made only bulkheads, another only decks, another only bow sections. Each piece was standardized, interchangeable, mass-produced. When sections arrived at the dock, they were welded together like giant Lego blocks. A welder, after 3 weeks of training, could do work that would take a skilled riveter months to master. Welding was the crucial innovation that traditionalists never accepted. Riveting was art. Each rivet had to be heated, inserted, hammered until flush. A single hull required hundreds of thousands of rivets, each placed by hand by men who had learned the trade from their fathers. Welding eliminated all that. A welded seam was faster, lighter, required less material, and could be done by someone trained in weeks. The British warned that welds were brittle, prone to cracking. Kaiser welded anyway. He calculated that even if some ships had problems, the production speed would compensate for losses. He was right. At Richmond shipyards, Kaiser implemented something never seen before: 24-hour shifts, 7 days a week. 90,000 workers operating in 3 shifts, building ships under floodlights at night. Among them, tens of thousands of women, the famous Rosie the Riveters operating cranes, welding steel plates, driving tugboats. The workforce wasn't skilled in the traditional sense, but it was massive, motivated and trained with industrial efficiency. Kaiser didn't need master craftsmen. He needed volume. The result was a statistic Germans simply refused to believe when their intelligence services reported it. At peak production in 1943, American shipyards launched a new Liberty ship every 8 hours. Not per day, per shift. 18 shipyards, operating in parallel, pouring ships into the Pacific and Atlantic at a pace that made U-boat sinkings statistically irrelevant. Dönitz was trying to empty the ocean with a bucket while the Americans opened a dam. But industrial abundance was only half the story. The other half was resilience, and no ship demonstrated this better than the SS Stephen Hopkins. On September 27, 1942, the Hopkins, a Liberty ship only 6 months old, sailed alone in the South Atlantic when it encountered something no merchant freighter should face: the Steer, a German auxiliary cruiser armed with 6 150mm guns, and its supply ship Tannenfels. The Hopkins was doomed, and everyone aboard knew it. A civilian freighter against a warship was a massacre waiting to happen. The Hopkins's only weapon was a single 4-inch gun from World War I, mounted on the stern, with ammunition enough for maybe 10 minutes of combat. Protocol was to surrender. Any sensible captain would have raised the white flag. Captain Paul Buck ordered them to fight. What followed was one of the most brutal and futile acts of defiance in the war. The Steyr opened fire at point-blank range, its salvos tearing through the Hopkins's thin hull. The freighter caught fire almost immediately. Men died in the first volleys. The rudder was destroyed. The ship began circling. But the Hopkins's gunner, Edwin O'Hara, kept firing. He had no fire control sight, no ballistic computers, just his eyes and years of training. And he started hitting. Shell after shell, O'Hara hammered the Steyr. He hit the engine room, hit the fuel tank, hit the bridge. The Steyr, built to overwhelm merchant ships, wasn't prepared for one that fought back. Its commander, Kapitan Horst Gerlach, ordered retreat, but it was too late. The Hopkins had hit 35 times before sinking. The Steyr, ablaze and out of control, sank 6 hours later. The Tannenfels fled. It was the only time in history an American merchant ship sank a German warship in direct combat. 15 men from the Hopkins survived in a lifeboat and were rescued a month later. 37 died, including Edwin O'Hara, who fired until flames consumed him. The Steyr took 29 crew with it. But the real math was different. The Steyr was irreplaceable, a specialized ship that had taken 2 years to build. The Hopkins was replaced in 3 weeks. 2 new Hopkins were being launched before the survivors were rescued. Germany lost a strategic asset it could never rebuild. The United States lost a commodity being produced faster than it could be sunk. Individual resilience stories multiplied. The SS John W. Brown survived 3 separate air attacks in the Mediterranean. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien participated in D-Day, delivering supplies on Normandy beaches while shells exploded around it. It still floats today, a museum ship in San Francisco. Of the 2,710 Liberty ships built, only 200 were sunk, a survival rate of 93%. They were robust, redundant, surprisingly hard to sink completely. And even when they sank, 3 more were already on the way. On the other side of the Atlantic, reality was beginning to penetrate German naval intelligence headquarters in Berlin. Captured documents from the Befehlshaber der U-Boote from May 1943 reveal something remarkable: bureaucratic panic. An intelligence report dated May 3, 1943 stated, "Previous estimates of American construction capacity were wrong by a factor of 3. Our assumptions about shipyard limitations do not apply. The Americans are not building ships in the traditional sense. They are manufacturing them like automobiles. We have no countermeasure for this scale of production." Another internal document, dated July 1943, is even more somber. Even assuming optimal sinking rates and minimal U-boat losses, we cannot win this war of attrition. For every ton we sink, 3 new ones enter service. Our tonnage warfare strategy has failed not due to tactical deficiencies, but due to a fundamental misunderstanding of enemy industrial capacity. Recommendation: complete strategic reevaluation of the Atlantic campaign. German U-boat prisoners of war, interrogated by Allied intelligence officers in camps in Canada and Britain, reported uniform disbelief when shown photographs of American shipyards. Many believed they were forged propaganda. One captured U-boat commander, Korvettenkapitan Peter Kremer, looked at aerial photos of Richmond shipyards and said, "This is impossible. You altered these photos. No country can build like this." When informed the photos were real, he remained silent for several minutes before asking, "Then why are we still fighting?" The scale was truly incomprehensible within the European paradigm. The 18 Kaiser shipyards alone employed more workers than the entire German shipbuilding industry. A single shipyard in Portland, Oregon, produced more tonnage in a month than all Japanese shipyards combined. The idea that a country could mobilize that amount of resources, training, and material for a single ship type was beyond the experience of any Axis nation. But the genius of the Liberty ship wasn't just quantity, It was adaptability. The standardized design meant modifications could be implemented quickly across the fleet. 55 Liberty ships were converted into Victory-class munition ships, with reinforced holds and fire suppression systems. Others were transformed into hospital ships, troop transports, floating repair ships, and even experimental rocket launch platforms. Some were equipped with barrage balloons. Others received heavy cranes for salvage operations. The modularity that enabled rapid production also enabled rapid customization. One particularly bizarre case, the SS Charles H. Kugel was converted into a pest control ship, equipped with massive insecticide tanks to spray Pacific islands before Allied invasions. Another, the SS James Longstreet, was transformed into a floating ice cream ship, producing 3,000 gallons per hour for troops in the Pacific. These eccentric uses demonstrated a deeper point. The United States had so many ships it could afford to waste them on specialized tasks. Germany was rationing every U-boat as a precious asset. The Americans were making floating ice cream. Versatility extended to the post-war period. Many Liberty ships remained in commercial service until the 1970s, 3 decades after their construction. They carried Marshall Plan aid, rebuilt global trade, moved refugees, and served as the backbone of global economic recovery. The good enough design the British had ridiculed proved robust enough for decades of service in rough seas. German perfection produced masterpieces that sank. American sufficiency produced tools that rebuilt a world. Wilhelmshaven, Germany, May 8, 1945. The command bunker was silent except for the ticking of a teletype receiving the Kriegsmarine's final transmission. Admiral Karl Dönitz, now briefly head of state after Hitler's suicide a week earlier, held a sealed envelope marked Verluste und Produktion, endgültig. Losses and production, final. He opened it with fingers that trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. 8 days ago he had signed the unconditional surrender. The war was over. But the numbers... He needed to see the numbers. Needed to understand mathematically what had happened. How a war machine that had dominated Europe in 3 years had been reduced to rubble in 5. The first page was his own losses. 783 U-boats lost. 28,000 submariners dead. 75% mortality rate, the highest of any German military branch, higher even than Waffen-SS divisions on the Eastern Front. His gray wolves, the ocean's most feared warriors, had been methodically exterminated. But Dönitz already knew those numbers. He had lived with them for months, watching his maps fill with black crosses marking lost U-boats. What broke him was on the next page, the attached intelligence report on Allied production. His eyes scanned the columns. Allied ships sunk by U-boats, 14.5 million tons, a crushing number. A campaign of destruction that would have defeated any nation in World War I. And then the next line, American merchant naval production, 1941-1945, 55 million tons. Dönitz read again, 55 million. For every ton his U-boats sank, the Americans built 4. They didn't just replace losses, they quadrupled the Allied merchant fleet while he tried to sink it. Every death, every torpedo, every sinking had been statistically irrelevant. They were emptying a bathtub with a cup while someone kept the tap open. There was an appendix, a translated report from interrogations of American naval engineers captured late in the war. They described the shipyards. 90,000 workers at a single facility. Ships built in days, not months. 24-hour shifts, parallel production lines, the 4-day, 15-hour record. Dönitz had thought they were propaganda when intelligence reports first arrived in 1943. He had ordered them verified. They were. And they were true. Dönitz placed the report on the table and looked through the reinforced window at Wilhelmshaven's destroyed docks. He could see the wreckage of 3 sabotaged U-boats, half sunk at the piers, useless now that the war had ended. Each had taken 18 months to build. Each had cost more than a small town could raise in taxes in a year, and the Americans were building larger ships in less than a week. He thought of all the strategies, all the tactics, all the innovations they had implemented. Wolfpack tactics, acoustic torpedoes, snorkels for extended submersion, new patrol routes, increasingly complex Enigma codes. None of it mattered. Not when the enemy could lose 3 ships and build 10 before the next attack. Not when the very definition of attrition was inverted. His U-boats had not failed tactically. They had been buried strategically under an industrial avalanche that no operational excellence could overcome. He had not lost to British admirals or to Allied radar. He had lost to Detroit, Pittsburgh, and California shipyards. He was fighting factories, not fleets. And factories don't tire, don't hesitate, don't stop producing. The final statistics read like an epitaph for an era. 2,710 Liberty ships built between 1941 and 1945. Average construction time, 42 days. Absolute record, 4 days and 15.5 hours. Production rate at peak, 3 ships per day across all American shipyards combined. Survival rate, 200 Liberty ships sunk, a loss of 7.4%. 93% survived the entire war. Many remained in service until the 1970s, 3 decades after their construction. In post-war interrogations, captured German leaders repeated the same theme with variations. It had not been a failure of courage. It had not been a failure of tactics. It had been a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of modern war. General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, commander of German forces in Italy, put it most directly. We fought brave soldiers and lost battles honorably. But the war was decided not by soldiers but by steel mills, oil fields, and assembly lines we never saw and against which we had no defense. Dönitz himself, in his post-war memoirs published in 1958, wrote with a brutal honesty that surprised many historians. We did not lose the Battle of the Atlantic to the Royal Navy, though they fought with courage and skill. We did not lose to Allied radar, though it was a formidable tool. We lost to Detroit, Pittsburgh, and California shipyards. We were fighting factories, not fleets, and factories don't tire, don't hesitate, and don't stop producing. In the end, we discovered we had brought swords to a machine fight. Albert Speer, Reich Armaments Minister, was even more direct in his Spandau memoirs. The war was lost the moment the United States entered, not because of their army, but because of their factories. They didn't fight like Europeans. We sought perfection in every weapon. They sought volume. We discovered too late that in the 20th century, volume is perfection. The lesson transcended the war. The Liberty ship permanently transformed naval and military doctrine, proving that in total industrial war, the capacity for rapid replacement surpasses individual quality. The mass production mentality of good enough in massive quantity delivered quickly became the cornerstone of American military logistics. It inspired the Essex-class aircraft carriers, P-51 Mustang fighters, Sherman tanks, and even post-war prefabricated housing. Levittown, post-war American suburbs were essentially Liberty ships made of wood and drywall instead of steel and welds. The concept of modularity and standardization dominated military thinking for decades. Shipping containers, which would revolutionize world trade in the 1960s, were direct descendants of Liberty thinking. Interchangeable rocket platforms, modular weapons systems. The very idea that standardized components could be combined in infinite configurations, all traced back to the Kaiser shipyards of 1942. Stalin, at the Tehran Conference in 1943, reportedly toasted the 3 pillars of Allied victory. To British courage, Russian blood, and American steel. Later, when pressed by Molotov about what he really believed won the war, he supposedly said more honestly, "It was American steel, poured, welded, and launched on a scale never before seen, that ensured blood and courage had the tools to win. Without it, we would have died courageously but died nonetheless." The Liberty ship's final legacy wasn't technological, but philosophical. It proved that in the industrial age, wars are won not just on battlefields but in factories, steel mills, and assembly lines. The nation that dominates mass production dominates the battlefield. Artisanal excellence has no answer for industrial abundance. Perfection cannot compete with volume. And perhaps most importantly, total war is decided not by the quality of an individual weapon, but by the capacity to produce, transport, and replace weapons faster than the enemy can destroy them. Today, 2 Liberty ships still float as museum ships, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien in San Francisco and the SS John W. Brown in Baltimore. They are relics of an era when America transformed its factories into arsenals and its assembly lines into weapons of war. When you visit them and walk their welded steel decks, you're walking on the tombstone of a German illusion, the illusion that excellence could overcome abundance, that quality could defeat quantity, that art could beat machines. Karl Dönitz had believed the math was on his side. He was right, but he was solving the wrong equation. He was calculating sinkings per month. The Americans were calculating ships per day, and in the end, in the total industrial war of the 20th century, the side that could manufacture victory faster than the enemy could cause defeat would always win. Always.